I think we'll get started. So this session is being recorded, and today, because it's more of an interactive session, all the cameras are on. If you could remain muted during the session, but so if you don't want your face to appear on any recordings, then obviously switch your camera off. Today is the day where we go through the homework, and Andy is the headmaster that's going to come in and mark it all. So yeah, he's prepped and ready, but thank you all for coming back today as well, given that there's a little bit of work for everybody to do today, but it is hopefully a good session where we start to see how possible it is to bring consent forms and information sheets together. So with that, I will hand over to Andy.
Thanks very much, Phil. This is a first for me, giving a presentation at a conference, although like all of you, I'm sure all very familiar with the world of Zoom at the moment. So today we're going to try and concentrate on a theme which is dear to my heart and has been dear to the hearts of many people I recognise are on the table. And that is the idea of developing some common documentation around biobanking so that we don't have to continue to reinvent the wheel when we're asked to produce documents, particularly as we're applying for Research Ethics Committee approval. So for those of you who haven't had the privilege of meeting before, my name is Andy Hall, and I was involved in biobanking for several years before I retired. And on retirement, I have taken on the mantle of chairing an NHS REC committee. But I must emphasize that I am talking in a personal capacity here, not as a representative of the HRA. It would help if my slides move forwards.
You need to say next slide. Sorry, Andy.
No, it's me, it's controlling.
You go. Okay, sorry.
Yeah. So I want to just do Phil's already done these first bits, and just to emphasize that after I've talked for about 5 or 10 minutes, there's going to be a group exercise. So you can't just relax and do nothing. You're going to have to work hard to try and make us reach this common aim. And at the end of that, we'll summarize what's happened on the interactive process and decide how to progress from there. So what are the benefits of harmonization? And I think all of you will recognize the phenomenon that I've tried to depict in this cartoon that I've pinched from the internet. And that shows that horrendous process of going through an ethics procedure. It can be horrendous, and you can feel there's a lot of people who are making lots of minor comments, not really understanding what you're trying to do, and picking it apart. And having now been on a REC for a couple of years, that really isn't what drives that process. What really drives that process is a desire to make documentation better on behalf of the donors to the biobank. So our role in a REC is to represent those donors to try and ensure that they understand what they are allowing you to do with their samples that you hope to collect. So when we're assessing a tissue bank, these are the sort of headings that we go through, and it might be useful for you to just review those with me. For those of you who've done this before, this will seem quite familiar, but actually it doesn't harm to just double check what's really going on. So well, the first heading we've got really is to review the social and scientific value in the design of the research tissue bank. That's really just to see, is it a worthwhile exercise? Is it for societal good? We'll also consider to a certain extent the logistics of collection, how data is linked to samples, what the public benefit would be, and also RECs are very keen to see what level of public involvement there've been in the design of the biobank and ideally in its running as well. RECs are very keen to look at recruitment arrangements with an eye to not excluding people unnecessarily and making sure that everybody has the opportunity to donate if they wish to. Now that can be a problem, and in terms of language barriers, for example, and one of the frustrations we have as RECs is that very often people say, I would like to include material in different languages, but I can't afford to do so. And if we could harmonize things, obviously that would be a way around that. How are donors identified? What's the impact, if any, there is on clinical care? So you have to be very careful when you're presenting plans to be sure that actually the routine clinical care is not impeded in any way. And of course, as you'll all be aware, that confidentiality issues are all very important in the design of this and any other research at the moment. So we're looking for the risk-benefit ratio for donors. Now, obviously, for biobanks, that's not quite the same as an interventional drug trial, where the risks may be quite considerable, even though the benefit may be quite considerable. So there's not usually too much of a debate about the risk-benefit ratios. We are very concerned about coercion and any pressure that's put on people to donate. And we are also very concerned that people taking consent are conscious of the need to assess capacity to consent. There should be clear ways of withdrawing consent. Ideally, there should be feedback to participants. There should be protocols for dealing with unexpected findings, and there should be transparency of what's going on, visibility for registration, visibility of the objectives of the biobank. Also, there should be a very clear way in which samples are distributed to researchers. Who can access the samples? How are they released? And is the biobank being used to seek approval for research projects conducted by people applying to your biobank? You can opt in or opt out of that option. If you opt in, how are those research projects assessed? And the key thing, which we're going to consider today, is the suitability of the supporting information. And those of you who've been through this process know that RECs are very interested in how consent forms, participant information sheets, or other media used for informing participants of what's involved are presented and therefore made understandable to donors. We also review access policies and a miscellaneous section of things such as posters, GP letters, etc. So anything that is put out there in the public domain, a REC will want to review before it is happy to give an approval. So we're stuck in a sort of conundrum when it comes to consent forms and participant information sheets. The quality of those is very variable, but often extremely poor. And that's certainly not confined to biobanks. Drug trial ones are a nightmare. They're often very, very long and very, very complicated. And they seem to be driven by requirements of lawyers rather than the requirement to actually give donors sufficient information to be able to, for them to make an informed choice. Complicated and legalistic. Now, against that, sometimes they don't include what I would consider key points. So there's a push and pull here. I'm saying they're too long, but I'm also saying they're not comprehensive. And that is a problem in practical terms in how you present this information. So they may not cover, for example, the use of animals in research, using the samples that are collected. That's now considered de rigueur for anybody going to a REC, that if animal usage is planned, it should be detailed. People are quite understandably sensitive about an analysis of DNA. That must be included if it's going to be included in the research. Export outside of the UK. Commercial interactions. So are there going to be interactions with drug companies and others? That should be specified. How we deal with unexpected findings, as I've already referred to. How consent is withdrawn, and privacy. In addition to being very long and complicated, they're often very poorly presented. Little thought of design, often little thought of font size required. And if you are dealing with people with capacity issues, maybe due to age or maybe due to medical conditions, alternative formats can be very useful. And there are some very good examples of how that should be done. And they are most often only in English, which excludes quite a percentage of people who could be included in most biobanks. So a common set of resources may be able to get around this. It could be co-designed with participants. And this is where public involvement would be very helpful. They could be road tested and should be road tested with a panel of people who can give feedback on how it could be improved by an iterative process. They could be well presented, resource rich, so they could make reference to videos and other ways of conveying information, which are now extremely common outside the bubble of bioethics. And they could be multilingual and multicultural. dealing with issues that particular groups are very concerned about. So your homework is really quite simple. All you have to do in the next few minutes is to boil down what we've suggested and to also look at the good examples that people have very kindly provided, to distill out of those what are the key elements that should be included in a harmonized process, which could be used off the shelf by any biobank in the UK. So when that exercise is finished, we'll gauge interest in taking all this whole process forward. One thing I would urge you to try and do is, let's see if we can do it this time, because this is the grand old Duke of York marching up this particular hill and unfortunately marching down it again a few times. So I would be delighted if after today we have a clear way of actually getting this particular albatross off the beach and manage to set it into flight, if my metaphor hasn't become too extreme. So that's my few brief words of introduction. So first of all, so while Jessica wrestles with the technology, so thank you very much indeed for your participation today. It's been very helpful, and the boards look like they've got some very helpful nuggets of information. It's always difficult to bring together lots of diverse opinions such as we've got represented today. And if we produced a document which kept every one of you entirely happy, I suspect that Tolstoy's record for the longest novel, well, that's Proust, isn't it, will be easily exceeded. So what we've got to try and do is to produce some sort of approach which enables you to have the key points that you want and also the key points that the donors want. So I think we should always be donor focused in how we do this. There'll be plenty of voices off which sort of says, no, the donors, it's the lawyers that matter, it's the covering your back approach. Now, I'm sorry, I don't really subscribe to that. The key thing here is that the donors have sufficient information to make an informed decision, right? So it's always impossible to give them all the information that they could possibly exist. And there's a feeling that you should, and I don't think that's true, because actually you just smother them with so much information, they either say no or they say yes. So the way that I think we can approach this, which has been successfully used in other circumstances, is to have a layered approach, such that you've got a very high level sort of description about what an individual biobank is all about, right? So very key information. It is a biobank that is aimed to do X, Y, and Z. It is funded by, and these are the key things that we do, and importantly, these are the things that we don't do. And the list of the things that you do, for example, would be animal experiments, DNA, export, and commercial interactions are the key drivers. I might have forgotten one or two. Okay, and so you say we don't do animal experiments in our biobanks, so not a commercial, not an interest for us here, or you say you do. And then there'll be an opportunity to be able to deal for an individual donor to say, well, actually, I don't really care about animal experiments from my particular. I'm sure it's done only when necessary, etc., but I've got a real thing about somebody analysing my DNA. I want to know what they want to do with that, etc. Then they can dive in and find out what your particular approach in your particular biobank is to that. What are your plans for that? And so it gives the donor a reasonable chance to find out just how much the information they need to make their informed choice. And personally, I think there's an option for a donor to say, actually, I know about these people, I've followed them for some time, I'm fully supportive of what they do, and I just want to go to the sign page very quick, please. Okay, because I fundamentally trust what they're doing. And the business that you have to force someone to sit down and go through it for point, I'm not absolutely sure is what we should do. But the information has to be there in case they do. Okay, I'm looking around for signs of disgust and dismay. And on page 1 of of your screens, there's no disgust and dismay. There's some anonymous people on page 2. So they're all down the bottom, the ones that we aren't seeing. So I'll have to assume they're happy too. But generally speaking, that's an approach. How are you doing with your boards, Jessica?
I'm all right. You can start going through now, actually, Andy. While I add some more on there. I sent you a link to the feedback board. Let me just.
What medium did you use for sending that link, Jessica? What channel did you use? Where am I going to find it?
Let me get you a copy board link. I'm going to send it to you on Zoom. How about that?
That's a good idea.
In the chat.
In the chat. Thank you very much. That's
Hall. Okay.
Here's go. Jessie is typing in something. This is as it happens. It's really exciting. Oh, there it is. Oh, good stuff. And all right.
Supply.
Okay, so you want me? I've got to just whiz through all these boards in turn, yeah?
Yeah.
And I'm going to share my screen.
Yeah.
And that would be a picture of you guys, which would be very scary for you. So you don't want that, do you? Right. Are you seeing a picture of a board? Thumbs up, please. Yes.
Yes, we are.
So number one. Oh yes, there's some good information down the bottom here. Okay. So. Okay, so the type number one was commercial access, yeah. Although this looks like number two to me.
That is number two, Andy. Data linkage.
Yeah. Okay. So sorry, Jessica. Are you going to send me these one by one?
They're all on the same board if you move around. So I think you
Oh, very clever. I'm with it now. Sorry.
It's okay. Sorry, I've tried to import all 10 boards into one board.
Okay, so room number one, which I had the privilege of joining for a while, have decided not to do a cut and post version. They've done a sort of free text thing, and we've got some useful information here. Now, as I say, I was in there for a while, and there was a very sensible and useful discussion about commercial access and the philosophy behind commercial access, but also the amount of information that was going to be needed to be presented to be appropriate for informed consent. So there's some helpful pointers in there. Does anybody in room one want to sort of bring out a key point at this juncture? Unmute yourself and scream.
Andy, could I just mention one thing, and that is, I mentioned it in a question to the group, but I have a concern that there's no distinction being made between access for commercial pharmaceutical and biotech companies and access for commercial biobanks or brokers.
Yeah.
And I feel that if samples are going to be sent to brokers, then patients ought to know about it. And I'm concerned about the lack of any mention of this in the documents that we've been sent.
Okay, that's a good point. That's a useful omission. So I think you've also triggered something in my mind during the discussions, Robert, and that was that these should be living and iterative documents. So you know, if we produce something and somebody like yourself sort of says, hang on a minute, we've forgotten to do that, then that could be incorporated into versions, living versions as it moves forward.
Yeah.
The other aspect of that is if we constantly have donors sort of saying, I don't understand question, you know, point 4, doesn't make sense to me, and you always having to explain it, we could make it more presentable. But I think you raised an important point. We'll make a note of that. Thank you.
Thank you.
So data linkage is group 2. We've got a philosopher on group 2, says what is data? So again, there's information here that we can use to distill down into producing some sort of useful template for us in most of the sections. Okay. Anybody in group 2 want to sort of say, but we've forgotten to capture this important point. You moved us out of the room just as we were capturing it? If not, on cost recovery, what have we got here? Okay, we don't think, for example, it's very useful to have something not suitable here, which was a breakdown of the costs. A very important point about no cost to the patient. Now that obviously we say, of course not, but actually if you're an external person coming in here, you might think that there was. So that's very important to think about, although you put it in the maybe not needed, but I think it's interesting to dwell on that for a second. We will cost everything. That's fine. Good. We've got information there. Anybody in group 3 sort of say, we've forgotten to capture this with hindsight. And Jessica's keeping me guessing where number 4 might be. I'll find number 4. No. Okay. I'll do number 5.
If you do 5, I'll try to import 4.
It's being shy, is it?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is about the research use. We've got here a bit about withdrawal of consent. It has to go somewhere, so that's quite a good place to think about it. Some cost recovery, that's a bit of a spread over to the other one, but that's fine. Use of DNA and RNA animals, very important, I think. Identification of patients. Specific condition types. Is that a not useful point? What's 0.8 ATP mean?
It's a reference to Arden Tissue Bank.
Oh, right. Oh, thank you.
I
Thank
give permission for any previous samples that are stored within pathology departments to be retrieved and used for education, training, and research. We were just being lazy, Andrew.
Thank you for the Babel fish there. That's very useful. That would have puzzled me for a while. I should know off by heart what the Arden Tissue Bank does say, but I confess I had slipped my mind putting that point. Okay, supplying data, which is number 5. Again, these are not hermetically sealed silos, are they? So there are obviously crossover points between some of these things. Definitions of data, combining data sets, etc., etc. Okay. There's an awful lot and has to go in, which was a bit of a worry in all of these boxes. So getting it all down is going to require the services of a poet, I think, but that's fine. And number 7. There we are, next to number 6. That's oh, now this is a different pattern. We've got some more definite things you don't have to include. That's handy. This is a research return. So this is a return of information, presumably. Now, this is quite a hot topic within the REC because it's very common for if somebody to sign up to a research project and never hear anything more about it ever again. And it is a common source of complaint. And I think, therefore, having some return of results is actually a very positive feature. Thank you. And access forms, access useful information there. Thank you very much. And 9, teams of skills. Yeah. So it looks to me, without going through this in painful, oh, they're a bit undecided in number 4. So they haven't sorted stuff out, but there's some very key points there. So it looks to me that we've got a lot of useful information where we can begin to distill this into some sort of template. And what I propose that we do is to ask for some input into that process. I've just discussed this with my colleagues after today's meeting, how we actually do that. Do we form a small working group, or do we actually just bang something out and then have people sort of say no? So if you're trying to do this sort of thing, the most scary bit is the blank piece of paper. If you actually put something down, then people are all too happy to sort of say, no, I don't like the way that's been done. But as long as they say, this is a better way of doing it, then you can move forwards. So I think the rule of the game should be, we should try and find a starting place with all of this, and then circulate it around for people to suggest better ways of doing it, right? Not, I don't like it. So the rule of the game is you can't say I don't like it. Don't join the game if that's all you're going to say. But but then we might be able to produce something. Now, I think this is another area where the perfect will be the enemy of the good, in the sense that we will never produce the perfect document first time, all right? So the name of the game here is to produce a document which is legally sound, of course, in terms of complying with REC and other key determinants of guidance of documents, of where we are in this field, but that we get it out there and we see how it works. We see in particular how the donors respond to it and have some way of feeding back from them they've understood or not what the information is in front of them, and which bits they found useful and which bits they didn't. And then the document improves over the years, because we spent, in my opinion, we spent an awful lot of time trying to produce the perfect document first time, and it doesn't work that way. And just to emphasize, this will be something which will be an optional resource for people in biobanks. This is not an officially endorsed process. I know that, I have to say that because I've seen Clive from the HRA on this call, and I will be in big trouble if I suggest that this is HRA approved. We will hope that the HRA will so like it that they will signpost it, but that's as far as we can go at the moment. So that's a sum up from me. Phil, I don't know if you want to wind up with any general comments. You said that I have to encourage people to log into the Woovar to chat and to join an informal discussion at 4 o'clock today, where free biscuits will be provided. Phil, is there anything else you would like to add?
I think you summed that up perfectly. So yeah, there's also a channel on the Hoover. I've been told it's pronounced. I think it is Wover, but I keep having to correct myself. Hoover. Yeah. Yeah, and there's a channel there around the UK Biobank Alliance, is what we're calling it, just to see if we can get people going on this topic. And yeah, join us at 4 o'clock for the informal chats where we can talk a little bit more about the day and how things have gone. And otherwise, see you tomorrow. And thank you for bearing and trying the Miro boards. It was something new that we were trying to do in the virtual sense. We hadn't used them before, so it was new for us as well. But hopefully you also found that was something useful, so you could all contribute on something together, even if we are kind of sat in rooms and just staring at screens. But thank you very much, and see you all hopefully a bit later at 4, otherwise tomorrow.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers all.